Welcome to Season 5, Episode 2 of CSS Breakdown, book by book. Today, we explore Chapter 2 of Andrew Haywood's Political Theory, an introduction, where we ask some of the most fundamental questions in political thought. What is human nature? How do we define the individual? And what is society really made of?
That's right.
Our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack these core concepts from Haywood's work. And these aren't just, abstract ideas. They're truly recurrent themes that profoundly shape our political beliefs and structures,
Absolutely.
offering surprising and often contradictory answers to who we are. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the bedrock of political thought.
And these questions, they seem abstract, right? Human nature, the individual, society. But they have really deep practical implications for understanding every political debate you encounter.
How so?
Well, think about justice, freedom, equality, even the value of politics itself.
Yeah.
Almost every political doctrine, every belief system, it's built on some theory of human nature. Sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's just implied. And these fundamental assumptions, they're the cornerstones of those enduring ideological divisions we see all the time, especially that tension between, say, individualism and collectivism.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with human nature itself. Haywood defines it as the essential and immutable character of all human beings. That immediately brings up that big question, doesn't it? What's innate versus what we pick up from, education or social experience?
Exactly. Because humans are incredibly multifaceted. We're biological beings, psychological, intellectual, social, even spiritual. It's definitely not a simple picture.
And some thinkers even reject the whole idea, right? Like Sartre.
Yeah, Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, his famous line, "Existence comes before essence." It's a radical view.
What did he really mean by that?
He was suggesting we aren't born with some fixed nature. We're sort of thrown into existence, and then we define ourselves through our choices, our actions. We're condemned to be free, as he put it. And that highlights a really crucial point here. These models of human nature we talk about, they're generally normative, not strictly scientific.
Normative, meaning?
They're often built on philosophical and moral assumptions about what humans should be or what's desirable, rather than just describing what is. And at the heart of it all, of course, is that classic debate, nature versus nurture.
Right, the age-old question. So if we lean into the nature side first, the idea of a fixed human core, what are the political implications there?
Well, if you believe human nature is mainly down to biology, genetics, then political theories often argue we should build our societies around those inherent traits.
Okay.
Think about Darwin's theory of natural selection.
Okay.
Herbert Spencer took that and ran with it, coining survival of the fittest. That fed directly into social Darwinism, which had a massive impact on classical liberalism. The argument became that things like success and failure, wealth and poverty, are basically biologically determined. So any attempt by the state to interfere, like through welfare, was seen as unnatural, counterproductive, even weakening society. It supports a very laissez-faire, hands-off approach to government.
Based on a belief in fixed abilities.
Precisely. And you see echoes later, like Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, suggesting biological programming drives us, though he did add that we can teach generosity, modify that instinct, perhaps.
But that nature argument, it can also take a much darker turn, can't it? Historically speaking.
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, some interpretations twisted it to emphasize biological differences rather than our shared humanity. Racialist theories, for example, treated races almost like different species with unequal inheritances.
Leading to horrors like Nazi ideology.
Exactly. That was the horrific culmination. And even within feminism, you had some difference feminists, like Susan Brown Miller, arguing that certain male biological programming, perhaps for dominance expressed through violence, was a root cause of inequality, rather than just social conditioning.
So these are really powerful, potentially dangerous ideas rooted in that nature perspective.
They can be, yes. They highlight how assumptions about our inherent nature can be used or misused to justify profound inequalities.
Okay, so let's look at the flip side then. Nurture. The idea that our social environment, our experiences, are what really shape us. If human nature is malleable, or plastic, as Haywood puts it, what does that open up politically?
Well, it shifts the whole focus, doesn't it, from biology towards sociology. And this perspective often carries much more optimistic, sometimes even utopian implications.
Because if problems are socially created,
then they can be socially solved. If things like poverty, crime, or conflict aren't hardwired into us, then we can change society to overcome them. Many socialist theories are built right on this foundation.
like Robert Owen.
Exactly. Robert Owen, the utopian socialist, believed you could basically create any character type by shaping the community environment. Karl Marx took it much further, arguing famously that it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but their social being determines their consciousness.
Meaning our social circumstances define who we are.
Pretty much. For Marx, we're homo faber, humans as makers. We shape our world through labor, and in doing that, we shape ourselves. Our nature isn't fixed. It evolves with our social conditions.
And feminists like Simone de Beauvoir.
She fits right in here, too. Her famous statement, "One is not born a woman, one becomes a woman," directly challenged essentialist views of gender. It argued gender roles are socially constructed, learned, not innate. This implies we can deconstruct them, maybe move towards a more androgynous human nature.
Even psychology got involved.
Oh, yes. Behavioral psychology, Pavlov, Watson, B.F. Skinner, emphasized conditioned reactions. Skinner saw human behavior as largely determined by external stimuli, effectively supporting the idea of social engineering to shape behavior.
Okay, so we've got nature versus nurture. Let's pivot to another key debate Haywood outlines. Intellect versus instinct. How much does reason guide us versus those non-rational drives, impulses, emotions, fears? The Enlightenment was clearly team reason, right?
Absolutely. The age of reason. Thinkers like Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, really elevated rationality. They saw humans fundamentally as thinking beings, capable of free will, self-determination.
And politically, what did that lead to?
Often, it fueled radical or revolutionary ideas. The belief was that reason could lead to progress, reform, a better society. Plato, way back, imagined philosopher kings ruling through reason.
An intellectual elite.
Right. Later, 19th century liberals like J.S. Mill used rationality as the basis for advocating individual liberty. Even female suffrage arguing women were just as rational as men.
And even Marx.
Marx and Engels called their theory scientific socialism. They believed they were using rational analysis to uncover the objective laws of history, proving capitalism's inevitable downfall. It was all about the power of reason to understand and ultimately change the world.
But that faith in pure reason started to crumble a bit, didn't it? Especially with ongoing wars, the rise of nationalism, things that didn't seem very rational.
Exactly. Criticism grew from the late 19th century onwards. Conservative thinkers like Edmund Burke were early skeptics. Burke argued human intellect is flawed, imperfect. The world's too complex for pure reason alone.
So what did he trust instead?
Tradition, custom, even prejudice, meaning gut feelings, ingrained habits passed down through generations. He saw these as often wiser guides than abstract rational blueprints.
And Hobbes. He wasn't exactly optimistic about reason either.
Thomas Hobbes definitely wasn't. He saw humans as driven primarily by non-rational appetites, fear, desire, the relentless pursuit of power. Reason was just a tool to serve those passions. And this grim view led him to argue for a really strong autocratic government, the Leviathan, just to keep those passions in check and prevent chaos.
And then Freud came along.
And blew the doors open on the unconscious mind. Freud's ideas about the id, the ego, the superego, the power of the libido, unconscious desires, it profoundly challenged the image of the rational individual. Politically, thinkers like Wilhelm Reich tried to link fascism to repressed sexuality, and new left figures like Herbert Marcuse explored how societal repression shapes us, suggesting liberation required tapping into those deeper drives.
Okay, nature, nurture, intellect, instinct. The third big debate, competition versus cooperation. Are we fundamentally selfish, egoistical beings, or are we naturally sociable and cooperative? This feels central to economic systems.
It absolutely is. If you assume humans are inherently self-seeking, then competition seems natural, maybe even beneficial. You see this idea in the ancient Greek sophists, and it's really developed in early modern natural rights theories, the idea that individuals possess rights primarily for their own benefit.
And utilitarianism.
Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism really crystallized this. Humans as calculators of utility, always seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. This leads directly to the model of economic man, rational, materially self-interested, which is the bedrock of classical economics and market capitalism.
Even Darwin gets pulled in here.
Yes, the struggle for survival aspect of Darwinism was often interpreted as supporting inherent selfishness. Richard Dawkins' selfish gene idea, while nuanced, can be seen in this light too, that our genes program us for self-preservation, though again he allows for learned generosity.
But there's a completely different picture painted by many religions and other secular theories, isn't there?
A radically different picture, yes. Most major world religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, tend to see humans as created beings with a spiritual dimension, capable of morality, compassion, part of a common humanity under God.
And Eastern religions?
Eastern traditions, like Buddhism, emphasize the interconnectedness of all things, the idea of oneness leading to ethics of nonviolence and compassion. The Buddhist concept of no self directly challenges individual ego.
And secular theories also support cooperation.
Many do. They stress our social essence, arguing we're fundamentally social animals who thrive through collective living and working together. From this view, selfishness isn't natural. It's often seen as a product of corrupting social structures, like capitalism.
Like Kropotkin.
Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist thinker, is a great example. In his book Mutual Aid, he argued that cooperation, not just competition, was a key factor in evolution, especially for humans. He saw mutual aid as biologically rooted and the foundation for a better anarchist communist society.
Okay, that's a really thorough look at the different takes on human nature. Let's shift focus now to the individual. When we talk about the individual in political theory, it's more than just one person, right?
Definitely. It implies someone distinct, independent, unique. Someone who makes choices, has autonomy, isn't just defined by their group. And usually it carries that idea of universalism, that all individuals possess inherent moral worth.
And individualism builds on that.
Yes. Individualism puts the individual first, claiming primacy over any social group or collective. Now, it's most famously tied to classical liberalism, think natural rights, limited government based on consent.
Like Locke.
Exactly. Government's job is just to protect pre-existing individual rights. Pushed to the extreme, you get anti-statist thinkers like Henry David Thoreau in the U.S., prioritizing individual conscience above all else.
And this links to capitalism.
Strongly. Especially what C.B. Macpherson termed possessive individualism, the idea that you own yourself, your abilities, and owe nothing to society. From this viewpoint, any regulation, especially economic, looks like a threat to individual freedom.
But individualism isn't only classical liberal, right? You mentioned it's versatile. How did modern liberals or even socialists engage with it?
That's a key point. Modern liberals like T.H. Green or L.T. Hobhouse reinterpreted it. They saw individuals not just as self-interested atoms, but as socially responsible beings, capable of personal growth, self-development.
So individualism becomes about flourishing.
Exactly. And this justified more government action, things like welfare, education, to ensure everyone had the opportunity to that self-development. It flipped the classical liberal view on its head, in a way. Some socialists, like Jean Jaurès, actually argued that true socialism was the completion of individualism, meaning genuine individual freedom and development could only happen in a cooperative, fraternal society, not a competitive one. Even recent third-way thinkers talk about a new individualism that balances autonomy with interdependence.
That's fascinating how the term gets used differently, but this is mostly a Western framework. You mentioned Buddhism earlier, the idea of no self, Anatman. How does that fundamentally challenge this whole Western focus on the individual?
It's a profound challenge. Anatman argues there is no fixed, separate, enduring self or soul. Instead, what we call self is just a temporary collection of changing phenomena. Physical form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. The skandhas?
A bundle of phenomena.
Right. And the implication is radical interdependence. If there's no separate self, then the boundary between me and you or me and the world dissolves. Politically, this fosters an ethic of deep compassion and interconnectedness. It suggests our natural relationship is one of caring, which has obvious implications for social welfare and also strong ecological leanings, seeing humans as part of nature, not dominant over it.
A completely different starting point. Okay, let's loop back to Western thought. Many theories use what's called methodological individualism. They start with a model of the individual, like rational self-interest, and build outwards. What's the potential problem with that approach?
The main critique is that it can be asocial and ahistorical. It risks ignoring how much our social context and historical period actually shape who we are, what we desire, how we reason.
So it assumes a fixed human nature across time and place.
Often, yes. Or at least it builds this model before considering social influence. Critics argue you have to see the individual, at least partly, as a product of society, which leads us straight into that tension between the individual and the community.
Right. Should we prioritize rugged self-reliance, or does that risk isolation and ignoring social bonds? The rugged individualism idea is very strong in the Anglo-American tradition, isn't it? Herbert Hoover championed it.
Very much so. It paints the individual as almost entirely separate from society, finding moral worth in self-sufficiency, hard work. Samuel Smiles' book, Self-Help, was hugely influential here.
What was its message?
Basically that help from without state aid, charity weakens people. True growth comes from within, through enterprise, thrift, perseverance. This thinking had a massive resurgence with the New Right in the 80s.
Reagan and Thatcher.
Exactly. They actively blocked the dependency culture they believed welfare states created. The push was all about shifting responsibility back to the individual, stand on your own 2 feet.
But the obvious counter is social inequality, right?
Precisely. Critics argue you can't hold individuals solely responsible for their fate when the playing field is so uneven, which naturally shifts the focus back towards the importance of community.
And many political traditions, socialists, conservatives, nationalists, emphasize community. What does community mean in this context?
It implies more than just a group of people. It suggests strong ties, shared identity, bonds of loyalty, duty, comradeship. It emphasizes the social roots of who we are. Communitarian thinkers, for example, directly challenge that liberal idea of the unencumbered self.
The self separate from its roles in communities.
Right. Communitarians like Alistair MacIntyre or Michael Sandel argue the self is constituted by its community, its traditions, its social roles. They often advocate for a politics of the common good to restore society's moral fabric.
Sociology has weighed in here too.
Heavily. Thinkers like Tönnies distinguish between Gemeinschaft, traditional community, based on natural affection and shared values, and Gesellschaft, modern society, more impersonal, contractual. Durkheim warned about anonymity, the normlessness that can arise when community breaks down. Both socialists and conservatives have drawn on these ideas to argue community is vital for stability and well-being.
But isn't there a danger in emphasizing the community too much?
Absolutely. That's the flip side. An overemphasis on the collective can crush individual rights and dissent. The most extreme examples are totalitarian regimes. Think of the Nazi concept of Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community.
Achieved through terror.
Precisely, strength through unity, but at the cost of individual freedom and life itself. This is why extreme individualists are so wary of any strong collective focus. They see the potential for tyranny.
It's a constant tension. So bringing this together, how much influence do individuals actually have in shaping politics? Are we talking great man history, or are individuals just products of larger forces?
Well, both extremes are probably too simplistic. The great man idea, like the Nazi Führerprinzip or Nietzsche's Superman, ignores context. But crude economic determinism, some Marxist views perhaps, ignores individual agency.
So a middle ground.
The more balanced view seems likely. Individuals do make politics, but they do it under specific conditions: intellectual, institutional, social, historical. Ideas are powerful, as Keynes said about academic scribblers influencing politicians years later. Think Thatcher drawing on Hayek.
And institutions matter.
Hugely. Max Weber talked about the shift to legal rational authority power resides in the office, not the person. But charismatic leaders, an FDR, a Thatcher, a Lenin, can definitely stretch, reshape, or even break those institutional molds.
So agency within structure.
That's a good way to put it. No individual acts in a vacuum. Our social essence shapes us. But politics is still fundamentally a personal activity. Individuals with vision, will, and opportunity can, and do, significantly shape events.
Okay, that leads us nicely into our final section. Society itself. Yeah. Humans can't really exist outside of some form of society. How does Haywood define it broadly?
Generally, as a collection of people within a territory showing regular patterns of interaction, having some structure and a sense of mutual awareness. It's broader than community, which needs that deeper feeling of affinity or loyalty.
And there's this idea now of a world society.
Yeah, the global village idea, thanks to technology compressing time and space, global events, instant communication. It creates a sense of interconnectedness.
But is it a real society?
That's the debate. Critics argue global connections are often thin, lacking the deep shared identity of national societies. Allegiances often remain primarily national. This brings us to collectivism.
Which you mentioned earlier in contrast to individualism.
Right. It's a broad term. Can mean state control, can mean communitarianism, sometimes just used as a synonym for socialism. But the core idea is stressing our capacity for collective action, working together for common goals, not just individual ones. It sees humans as fundamentally social animals with a collective identity.
Where is this idea strongest politically?
It's fundamental to socialism thing, comrade, class solidarity. Also central to feminism, gender, sisterhood. And nationalism and racialism are inherently collectivist, defining identity through the nation or race.
And the state often gets linked to collectivism.
Yes, the state is often seen as the main vehicle for collective action. This is why the New Right attacked state intervention welfare, regulation as the rise of collectivism, seeing it as the enemy of individual liberty.
But collectivism can be seen as compatible with individualism.
If the goal of collective action, perhaps through the state, is seen as enhancing individual self-development, providing education, healthcare opportunities, then yes. Some argue collectivism fulfills individualism in that sense. And then there's self-managing collectivism, like by anarchists.
Beyond the state.
Exactly. Collective action by free individuals working together voluntarily, like in a cooperative or commune. If it's based on self-management, it's not necessarily anti-individualist.
Okay, let's look at theories of society. Is it something humans created, an artifact? Or is it more like a living organism? And is it based on consensus or conflict? What's the individualist view?
The individualist view sees society as a human creation, an artifact built by individuals to serve their own interests. Margaret Thatcher echoing Bentham, there is no such thing as society fits here. Classical liberalism's atomistic theory sees society as simply a collection of self-seeking individuals.
Held together how?
By enlightened self-interest, basically. And consensus. Think Adam Smith's invisible hand coordinating individual actions, or Hayek's idea of spontaneous order emerging without central design. The political implication is minimal government. That government is best which governs least.
What's the opposing view, the organic analogy?
This sees society not as a machine but as a living organism, an organic whole. It's holistic, the whole is seen as more important than the individual parts, and society exists to maintain itself, like a body.
Like the ancient Greek body politic.
Precisely. This view often has conservative implications. It tends to legitimize the existing social order, see hierarchy as natural, like different organs having different functions, and emphasizes tradition and social cohesion. Different groups or classes fulfill necessary roles.
But what about conflict? Society isn't always harmonious.
Far from it. Conflict theories are crucial. Pluralist theory sees conflict between groups, but believes the political system can manage and balance these competing interests. Elite theories, though, argue power is really concentrated in a minority, so the main conflict is between the ruling elite and the masses, with order kept via manipulation or force.
And Marxism.
Marxism is probably the most influential conflict theory. For Marx, the fundamental conflict stems from private property and the economic system. It creates opposing classes, the bourgeoisie owners and the proletariat workers.
Based on exploitation.
Yes, the extraction of surplus value from the workers. Orthodox Marxism sees this class conflict as the driving force of history, shaping everything else, including politics, which is seen as a tool to maintain class domination.
This connects directly to the idea of social cleavages, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The major divisions within society.
Exactly. Social cleavages are deep, persistent splits based on factors like economic status, race, religion, culture, gender. They're politically important because they often form the basis for group identity and political mobilization. Think identity politics.
What's traditionally seen as the main cleavage?
Historically, social class. The Marxist view, as we said, sees the bourgeoisie-proletariat divide as fundamental, driven by ownership of the means of production. Marx predicted workers would gain class consciousness and overthrow capitalism.
Has that held up?
Well, post-Marxists point out those predictions didn't fully materialize, and traditional class struggle seems less central in many advanced economies. Non-Marxist views focus more on income, status, occupation, middle class versus working class. That link to voting behavior also weakened from the 70s onwards in post-industrial societies, though concepts like the underclass show class divisions certainly haven't vanished.
What about race and ethnicity?
These are hugely significant cleavages. Historically, race was used to create hierarchies, often based on pseudoscience, justifying colonialism and culminating in Nazi racism. Ethnicity is often preferred now, focusing on shared culture, language, history.
And politics based on this.
Anti-racist politics, like the U.S. civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King, aimed to dismantle discriminatory structures. More radical movements like Black Power or the Nation of Islam sometimes saw racial divisions as deeper, even advocating forms of separation, so you see different political responses to the same cleavage.
And finally, religion. Its role seemed to be declining, but maybe not.
That's the interesting thing. The secularization thesis predicted modernization would diminish religion's public role. But since the 1970s, we've seen significant religious revivalism.
Examples.
The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, the rise of the new Christian right in the U.S., politically active Hindu or Sikh groups, the global growth of Pentecostalism. Religion is clearly still a powerful political force.
Particularly Islamism.
Islamism, as a political ideology, emphasizes the primacy of religion over politics. It advocates for an Islamic state governed by Sharia law. Its goals often include promoting pan-Islamic unity, challenging secular or Western-influenced leaders in Muslim countries, and resisting external cultural or political influence. It's a major factor in global politics today.
Wow. What an incredible breadth we've covered today in this deep dive. Just mapping out these fundamental questions from Haywood gives you such a framework. Human nature fixed or fluid, rational or instinctual, competitive or cooperative.
Yeah, the absolute basics.
Then the individual autonomous and primary or shaped by community.
Mhm.
And society itself, artifact or organism, consensus or conflict. Understanding these debates is just, well, it's crucial for making sense of political theory and, frankly, current events, too.
Absolutely. These aren't just dusty philosophical ideas. They are alive in the political arguments we hear every single day, often lurking just beneath the surface.
They really do shape our world, often in ways we don't even consciously recognize, underpinning our assumptions about how things should be run.
And maybe for you, our listener, here's something to chew on. We've talked about these enduring debates, nature versus nurture, selfishness versus cooperation, individual versus collective. As we face massive new challenges, things like AI, climate change, global pandemics, which of these fundamental perspectives on humanity and society do you think will gain prominence? Or should gain prominence?
That's a heavy question.
It is. And maybe, what responsibility do you feel you have in deciding which vision of ourselves and our social world we should embrace moving forward? Something to think about.